There was something in the air. Intuition, perhaps, but Bishop Alphonse Favier knew that there was trouble over the horizon. He could sense it. In the past, it was not unusual to hear of attacks on Christian missions once a month. Now, the reports come in almost daily. Boxers, fanatical peasant groups, were looting and burning missions in coordinated attacks. Previously, the attacks were contained in Shandong province. But now it seemed the groups had expanded into several other provinces as well. The capital itself was no longer safe from attacks. Trouble was indeed brewing on the horizon. As more and more attacks occurred within Peking, more and more refugees took shelter in the Beitong Cathedral. After all, Beitong seemed to be one of the most defensible buildings in all of Peking. Even so, it was evident that it would not be long before Beitong itself would be the target of Boxer attacks. Bishop Favier had tried to contact the Chinese Foreign Ministry for protection, but the government had only sent a couple of poorly trained Chinese soldiers. Another letter sent from the ministry claimed that the Boxer movement was too great for the empress to suppress. It was clear to the bishop that the government was supporting the Boxers, whether implicitly or explicitly. Then, even more bad news. A report came in saying the Boxers had destroyed both the railroad and telegraph line connecting Peking and Tianjin. No Western troops would be able to reach Peking, as Peking was virtually isolated from the outside world. Bishop Favier couldn't even contact the French Foreign Office, informing them about the situation at hand. At this moment, Bishop Favier realized that the defense of the cathedral would be the responsibility of him and God alone. As the anxious days wore on, Bishop Favier could see more and more of the European residences being set ablaze. There were now about 3,000 people residing in Beitong, among which were only a handful of Marines. Bishop Favier anticipated trouble brewing on the horizon, so began to stockpile food, supplies, and weapons. The occupants had set to work preparing barricades and fortifications to defend the cathedral in the event of a siege. Then, several nuns and children hurried into the cathedral. They came with the news that the Bishop of Sitong Cathedral had been killed. Bishop Favier's concern grew even more as an attack on Beitong seemed imminent. He would be proven correct, as that evening a group of Chinese Boxers surrounded the compound. Their mantra needed no further clarification: support the Qing, destroy the foreigners. They held their Boxer banners and chanted "Sha Shao," kill, burn. Bishop Favier held his breath. The siege of Beitong Cathedral had begun. During the late 1890s, it was clear to the Chinese that the Westerners were there not only to conquer China territorially, but also culturally, through the use of Christian missionaries. The erosion of the superior Chinese culture would not be tolerated by any proud Chinese. A humiliating defeat in the 1895 Sino-Japanese War made it clear to all that China had fallen behind Japan, long considered an inferior nation by the Chinese. In the peace treaty, China had to cede yet more of its territory, losing Taiwan and Korea to Japan. In the following years, the Western powers participated in a scramble for China, leading to China being carved up into spheres of influence. Dalian was ceded to Russia, Qingdao to Germany, Guangzhou Wan to France, and the new territories to British Hong Kong. It was all too much for the proud Chinese to bear. Droughts and famine in the North China region led to severe unrest among the peasantry. Many of them flocked to a new movement known as the Fists of Righteous Harmony. This movement, referred to in the West as the Boxers, were trained martial artists, skilled in the art of hand-to-hand combat. They incorporated beliefs of mysticism into their teachings, which included teachings about spiritual possession and chanting while practicing. They also taught that through enough spiritual practice, the boxers would be immune to bullets. Any boxer killed by a bullet was explained away as them not having enough spiritual belief. In the wake of the defeat to Japan in 1895, the emperor declared a 100 days reform campaign to help modernize the state. This effort was undermined by Empress Dowager Cixi, who held true power over the emperor. Recognizing that their grasp on power was weakening, Cixi declared nominal support for the Boxer movement, who in her view could aid the Qing in expelling the Westerners out of China. The Boxers targeted foreign Christian missionaries, who in their view were the epitome of the forces that were destroying China. The Boxer attacks on mission stations increased in number and intensity. On New Year's Eve of 1899, Anglican missionary Reverend Sidney Brooks was killed in Shandong. Clearly, the turn of the century would not bring peace and prosperity, but death and destruction. Throughout 1900, the Boxer movement had spread from Shandong into neighboring provinces. Soon, cities such as Peking and Tianjin were infested with Boxer activity. The crisis began in earnest when in June, the Boxers besieged the legation quarter in Peking. Empress Dowager Cixi issued an imperial decree declaring that imperial troops were to support the Boxers militarily. Soon, the entirety of the legation district was besieged by both Boxers and imperial troops, with no hope of escape. Among those trapped within the legation quarter were about 1,000 foreigners, many of whom were missionaries, and 3,000 Chinese converts. Many converts were barred entry due to limited space, as the quarter was already overcrowded. Within Peking, all of the missions had been burnt and the inhabitants massacred. Those who survived made their way to the legation quarter, the last bastion of safety within Peking. Throughout the months of July and August, the besieged occupants of the district could hear daily buzzing of bullets flying overhead, along with the occasional artillery shell crash into a building. All the morning, firing was heavy and incessant, bullets falling about us, so it was not safe for us to step outside the chapel. Mary Elizabeth Andrews joined the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions in March of 1868. She worked at the Tongzhou Mission Station up until June of 1900, when the board moved all staff from Tongzhou to Peking for safety. The occupants of the legation delegated tasks to one another. They would perform duties such as patrolling the perimeter, firing back at the Boxers, setting up defenses, and performing expeditions to capture cannons and equipment. The women would perform housekeeping tasks such as cooking, cleaning, instructing the children, and holding services for the Chinese Christians. Interestingly, they were also tasked with sewing sandbags for the defense of the compound, which is what took up most of Andrew's time. Today I have sewed steadily on handbags for fortifications, from breakfast to supper time, only stopping a few minutes for dinner. By the 30-day mark, the fatigue had caught up to Andrews. Being trapped in the same location, not knowing whether the next day would be the last, the situation was taking its toll on all the occupants of the legation. Sleeping in uncomfortable positions, constant gunfire noise, extreme summer heat, and swarms of mosquitoes were some of the troubles Andrews had to face. Add to that the fear of acquiring sickness and disease, and that they were unaware if there was even any rescue coming their way. The situation seemed to be a hopeless one. I felt so weary and homesick last night, so longed to be folded and cuddled, that I just wanted to cry. The nights are so weary with heat, insect bites, and the worrying of the little children who are half sick and as uncomfortable as the older folks. It is strange how one grows accustomed even to bullets flying all around, to balls whistling over our heads, and to shells bursting here and there, and goes quietly on with one's work as if nothing was happening. The nights are very weary, and every morning, by the time breakfast and the morning duties and prayers are over, I feel as if I had reached the very end of my strength and could not longer hold my head up. Often I lie down and sleep until dinner time, but it is very hot, and whether by day or by night, sleep is not very refreshing. Throughout the entire ordeal, Andrews always thought about the Chinese converts above all else. They were the entire purpose of traveling thousands of miles away from home to an unknown land, after all. We have passed another terrible night. A night of much prayer, for we are facing the dreadful possibility of being obliged to leave all these dear native Christians to massacre or worse. It seems as if we could not. To die with them would be easy, as compared with leaving them to their fate. Because of the siege, Andrews and the other Americans had to celebrate the 4th of July in most unusual circumstances. Such a strange 4th of July. We had no way of celebrating except singing America, Battle Hymn of the Republic, and Oh, Say Can You See this morning. And most of us are wearing little badges of red, white, and blue sewing silk. Just now, Major Conger, our minister, brought over a copy of the Declaration of Independence, which had been hanging in his study. He took it down to read today and found that a bullet had been fired through it and lay on the mantel behind it. Through it all, it was Andrew's faith in God that helped her get through the trial. Whether we shall all get out of this place alive or not seems quite uncertain, but the Lord holds our hearts quiet. Of course we do not fear death, yet such a death, as would be our fate if they should succeed in forcing an entrance, does seem terrible. Only we know that where the Lord leads, we can follow, and that the end is home. If you are enjoying the episode so far, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing the video with your friends. Thank you for your support. Once it became clear that the Qing government was taking a supportive stance towards the Boxers, the Western powers began to discuss their options. The decision was made for them when the Empress Dowager issued a declaration of war on the Western powers. To Cixi, this would be the best opportunity to drive out the foreigners and restore the authority of the Qing over China. The Chinese provincial governors, however, refused the orders. Chinese military reforms during the Taiping Rebellion had decentralized the army structure, and now many imperial troops were commanded by the provincial governors instead of the emperor directly. As such, true military power lay in the hands of governors such as Yuan Shikai, giving them extraordinary influence. The Western powers organized a relief force to save the beleaguered Peking legation. Yet, the 2,000-strong Seymour expedition became besieged themselves and in need of rescue. An alliance of 8 nations agreed to send an expeditionary force to free the Peking legation and to force Cixi to back down. These 8 nations are Great Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, Italy, the United States, and Japan. The motives for doing so were varied. The nations wanted to avoid the humiliation of being unable to protect their own citizens. The already established powers of Great Britain, France, the United States, and Russia wanted to preserve their concessions in China, while the other nations wanted to extract new Chinese concessions for themselves. After all, signing an unequal treaty with China was all the rage amongst Western powers at the time. Japan wanted to demonstrate its newfound hegemony in Asia after its victory in the First Sino-Japanese War, and to show that Japan was just as much a Western power as Great Britain or France was. As such, of the 20,000 troops that made up the expedition, half of them would be Japanese. After successfully relieving the city of Tianjin, then capturing the Taku forts, the expedition made its way up the path towards Peking. After some light fighting, the expeditionary force reached the Peking legation quarter on August the 14th and lifted the siege of the district. The legation had survived a 55-day long siege. Of the initial 400 soldiers, 55 were killed and 135 were wounded. And among civilians, 13 were killed and 24 wounded. The Beitang Cathedral, however, was still under siege. The entire compound was defended by just 40 French and Italian soldiers and was besieged by some 10,000 Boxers. Bishop Favier's stockpile of supplies was life-saving, although he did not anticipate that he would need to care for the needs of 3,900 Chinese Catholics. Even though there was an ample food supply, strict rationing had been enforced to hopefully last until a rescue mission arrived. It was on the 16th of August that the Japanese contingent of the expeditionary force relieved the Beitang. Bishop Favier had miraculously led the defense of the Beitang for 2 months. Of the 3,900 people taking shelter in the cathedral, 400 were buried and many more were missing. After finally being freed from the siege, Mary Andrews went back to Tongzhou to assess the damage to the base there. The destruction of all our property was complete. Not even a whole brick left, either in the city or at the college. Even the foundations dug up and carried away. I find that I do care for my possessions now that they are in ashes, though their loss does not make me unhappy, and I am so glad that the really precious things cannot be lost. After the capture of Peking by the expeditionary force, the Empress Dowager and the Qing imperial court fled to Xi'an. The soldiers of the expeditionary force began to commit horrific atrocities in the occupied territories. Decapitation of civilians, looting, destruction of crops, and even rape of women and girls. The Boxers simply needed to drop their banners and weapons, and they would be indistinguishable from the average peasant. As such, the troops would execute any civilian even suspected to have Boxer sympathies. It was said that the entire city of Peking had either fled or was killed. The streets of the capital city now lay eerily silent. In Russian-occupied Manchuria, entire households of Manchus were slaughtered, since many Manchus had Boxer sympathies. The exiled Qing court held out for a year in Xi'an until Cixi was persuaded to accept the peace terms. The Empress Dowager accepted the peace treaty because the terms would not include any territorial losses or the removal of her from power. The treaty, known as the Boxer Protocol, was simply a war indemnity, but a costly one. China would compensate all 8 nations of the alliance, plus 3 other nations that did not send troops: Belgium, the Netherlands, and Spain. The debt that China was to pay to the Western nations would not be paid off until World War II, some 40 years later. Even then, there was still debt to be paid off, and the remainder of the balance was waived off due to the war. In all, China would pay an amount of money equivalent to $61 billion in 2010. This money was paid through the use of new taxes onto the peasantry, further impoverishing the already poor populace. The number of casualties during the Boxer Rebellion was immense. Since missionaries made up the majority of foreigners living in the Chinese inland, they would be the ones to suffer the most. 136 Protestant missionaries, 53 children, and 47 Catholic priests and nuns were killed. The ones who suffered the most, however, would be the Chinese faithful. 2,000 Chinese Protestants, 400 Chinese Orthodox, and 30,000 Chinese Catholics were massacred by the Boxers and imperial troops. The Boxers, who were fighting in the name of the Qing, and the Qing troops were the ones to slaughter their own countrymen. Among the missionaries who died were Baptists, Presbyterians, Anglicans, Lutherans, Methodists, and Plymouth Brethren. The Christian and Missionary Alliance suffered 36 dead, 21 missionaries, 12 children, and 3 Chinese assistants. The China Inland Mission would suffer the heaviest casualties. 79 people died, 58 missionaries, and 21 children. Hudson Taylor refused the compensation given to the China Inland Mission for the losses. Instead, those funds went to construct Chinese universities, such as Tsinghua University. To give these people who died a voice, I would like to read some of the last words of these missionaries who died during the Boxer Rebellion. If you never see me again, remember, I am not sorry I came to China. Whether I have saved anyone or not, he knows. But it has been for him, and we go to him. Darling ones, goodbye. Susan Rowena Bird, American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions. Last letter to her brother. Dear ones, I long for a sight of your dear faces, but I fear we shall not meet on earth. I have loved you all so much. I am preparing for the end very quietly and calmly. The pain will soon be over, and oh, the sweetness of the welcome above. Elizabeth G. Atwater, China Inland Mission, last letter to her family. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. If that is the way I can best serve Christ, I am ready to die. Reverend Dwight Howard Clapp, American Board, to the converts in his mission. With love unbounded and full of joy in your sweet and precious love to all folks, God be with thee till we meet again. Reverend Francis Ward Davis, American Board, last letter to his wife. There is perhaps one chance in 100 that we may escape, but if we must die, we are not afraid. If the Lord bids us, we will cheerfully lay down our lives for his sake. All the missionaries are in the same danger, but if we are killed and not one escape, there are many more who will be certain to take our place. Reverend Herbert Dixon, English Baptist Mission, last words to a Chinese preacher. I do not regret I came to China, and although my life will have been short, it will in some way have fulfilled the Master's will. May the Lord's will be done. Reverend Sidney W. Ennals, Baptist Missionary Society. Personal diary when Ennals was fleeing into the mountains. We know that after this time of trial, China will be a very different land. Truly, the foundation of the church has been laid by blood. We know not at the present how many lives have been laid down. God ruleth over all, and he must have some wise purpose in allowing all of this to come to pass. Emma Georgiana Hearn, China Inland Mission. Last letter to her siblings. I am writing this as it may be my last to you. Who knows, but we may be with Jesus very soon. This is only a wee note to send our dear love to you all. and to ask you not to feel too sad when you know we have been killed. We have committed you all into God's hand. We will make a way for you all. Try and be good children. Love God. Give your hearts to Jesus. This is your dear parents' last request. Your loving Papa and Mama. Duncan K. and Caroline M. K., China Inland Mission. Last letter to their children. Our way to the coast is cut off. If we are not able to escape, tell all our friends we live and die for the Lord in China. The way to the coast is shut up, but the way to the Lord is open. Let not your heart be troubled, not your hands sink down, nor be discouraged. The seed sown will surely bear fruit of ripened harvests in due time. Reverend Carl L. Lundberg, Christian and Missionary Alliance. Last letter. This is a sad time for China. If all missionaries are murdered, it will move the church in a remarkable way. If it is God's way of evangelizing China, then surely we ought to be ready to die for the gospel's sake. None of us want to die, but we all want to say, "Thy will be done." Reverend Williams Adam McCurrock, Baptist Missionary Society. The last letter to his mother. The soldiers are just on us, and I have only time to say goodbye to you all. We shall soon be with Christ, which is very far better for us. We can only now be sorry for you who are left behind, and our dear native Christians. William Graham Pete, China Inland Mission. Last letter to his parents. These men and women gave up everything to come to China. Their families, their livelihoods, their security, their homes, and eventually their lives. It is upon the blood of the martyrs that the church is founded upon, both in the Roman Empire and evidently also the Chinese Empire. The way that the missionaries conducted themselves made an impact on ordinary Chinese. The Chinese who did not join the Boxers had suffered greatly because of them. As such, many of the Chinese would become more receptive to the teachings of the missionaries. The years following the Boxer Rebellion would be a golden era for missions in China. Somewhat paradoxically, the loss of missionary life would increase public attention of missionary efforts in China. Many new missionaries would make their way to participate in the Chinese mission field. 25 years later, in 1925, there would be an estimated 8,000 missionaries in China, an all-time high. Why did God let such a terrible tragedy befall the mission in China? I don't have the answer to that. But the Boxer Rebellion was a trial by fire for both the missionaries and the Chinese church. It purified the resolve of the missionaries. They were reminded of their mission in China. Many had taken the voyage overseas, knowing that they may never see their homes and families again. And for many of them, they would be buried in China. As you can tell through many of the quotations, none of the missionaries who perished regretted their decision to go. In fact, they were honored to take part in the suffering of Christ. It didn't mean that they were happy to die. No, they simply trusted the Lord, that His ways were the best ways. And they knew that they would be going home. Sure, they would never see Britain or America again, but they knew that they were going back to their true homes. They would not ever see their families again, but they only had to wait a while longer before they would be reunited in heaven. By going to China, these men and women gave up everything, yet by doing so, their impact will last an eternity, and their story will be carried on from generation to generation. Sometimes I wonder to myself, who gets the privilege of writing history? What person gets to decide whose story will live on for generations to come and who will be quickly forgotten? In all of my years of living, never once have I had another person tell me the story of the Boxer Rebellion. Not in history class, not in Sunday school, not in church. Before doing my research, I had never heard the name of Mary Elizabeth Andrews, or Susan Rowena Bird, or Dwight Howard Clapp. Yet, are their stories any less deserving of being told than that of, say, Hudson Taylor, a name hardly any Christian would have not heard of? But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Perhaps this is how they would have wanted it to be. To not be known, to be forgotten, to not be remembered. To simply give up their lives in service to God. My hope is that I will be able to preserve their stories for generations to come. That those who died as martyrs in China will not slowly fade out of our collective memories. The Boxers had tried to exterminate Christianity from China. Support the Qing, destroy the foreigners was their rallying cry. Yet, ironically, the faith they sought to destroy would outlast the very dynasty the Boxers were attempting to support. For in just 10 years' time, the Qing dynasty would be no more. It marked the close of the 4,500-year-long history of Imperial China. The imperial system had been on its death throes for 70 years. The Boxer Rebellion was simply the final nail in the coffin for the Qing. In its place was a new and shiny republic that would last 10,000 years. Or maybe not. That republic would be led by a man who would have been targeted by the Boxers for death. Fortunately for Sun Yat-sen, who was in Japan during all the chaos, the very not Christian nation of China would be led by a man who had accepted Jesus as his personal savior. How does this stunning turn of events come about? Well, stay tuned for the next episode to find out. The legacy of the martyrs of China lives on to this day. Anytime a Chinese house church gathers in secret, they can thank the sacrifice of thousands of missionaries who would go and eventually die in China. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of The After Act Show. You can contact me by leaving a comment in the comment section or by emailing me at theafteractshow@gmail.com. You can find the sources used in the episode description. Thank you to the artists who made the sounds and music used in the episode. You can find links to their works in the description as well. If you like the episode, why not give the video a like and subscribe to the channel? You'll get notified whenever a new episode is released. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.